Now, seeing as we do have a small group of people here, I mean, we can just keep folks unmuted, and you're more than welcome to ask questions along the way if you like. Happy to be more informal. All right, let's get on with it. Let's do a thing. Oh, wait, we got a flash. Got a flash with chat. Let's get chat up as well. There we go. Ben says toggling between you and Maze, but that's fine. Yeah, if someone else speaks, it will the camera will go away from me. It should be staying on my screen though. We'll see how we go. If it does move off screen sharing, we might want to keep audio just underneath for a moment, just so folks can see the slides. All right, let's get through the formal part of the presentation so that we can get to questions that anyone has. Oh, okay, there we go. You got a sleeping toddler nearby, so chat for you as well. Awesome. Okay. So what are we going to talk about here? We're going to talk about how voice acting in games can actually solve problems for you. We're going to talk about some writing considerations. We're going to talk about some things to think about when it comes to performing voice acting and also directing as well. Now, that's a lot to get through. So I'm going to try and get through what we've got in terms of formal content fairly quickly because it's a lot of topics to touch on. What's important to me may not address your primary concerns or the questions that you have. So let's get to it. I'm going to try and make sure that I don't overstay my welcome as much as possible so that I can leave space for you all for QA. So any questions you've got, we can get to that. Now, we are now formally recording to the cloud, and the talk is going to go up at this URL, which is on our first slide here, post talk. That's a Dropbox folder. I'll also be popping it up to YouTube after the fact. I'll be tweeting the link, which brings me to, who am I? Why am I here? I am a voice actor and a voice director first. I do a little bit of audio engineering, but I'm certainly a writer and a game developer second to all of that. So my core skill set is voice acting and directing. That is my sweet spot. Now, we're going to be looking at those other areas because voice acting is always in conjunction with those other skills. We work closely with them, but they're not my core skill set. I work over at Tavern of Voices. That's the company that I provide voice acting consultancy through. If you're curious as well about what I've been doing for the last 5 months, which is all about voice-based games, then my Navy Boards project has a lot of information up at alexa.kevinpower.com. You can find me on most socials, and I think most of you all are connected to me on Twitter as well. Already, but you can find me on most socials, including Twitter as voiceover_AU, and that's where I'll be tweeting any follow-up information, any follow-up links, like where the actual recording ends up on YouTube. So why voice acting? It's a pain. It's a real pain. It's time consuming to create. We don't even know what our story is yet. We're trying to get a lock on the actual writing. We've got a bunch of spreadsheets. They're all on fire. Voice acting means wrangling people. Everyone hates hearing their own voice. And it's one of those considerations that's often left in traditional development as well to the last, or it's just cut off. It's too hard. It's too costly. Okay. So why should we even think about voice acting? Well, let's hear from an old friend. Very old friend. Now, are we not getting audio at the moment?
No, no audio.
All right. Okay, I'm going to stop the sharing for a second. I forgot to press the magic button. Bear with me for 2 seconds. All right, let's go back to sharing a screen. I did this before when I was testing, but I forgot to do it this time. Share computer sound. There we go. There we go. This is how we know it's happening live.
Really?
All right, Google Slides. Now if you can get out of my way, that'd be great. All right, let's try that again.
The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it.
I just wanted to hold for that strings before we moved on there. Now, admittedly, Kate Blanchett is a pretty high bar to compare against, but why voice acting? Because it moves us and it creates human connection. Empathy compels us to share pain with a character, compersion to share the joy that another character experiences as well. Now, there is so much to unpack, even in that minute of performance from Kate. And again, it's a very high bar, but she's bringing mainstream audiences at the opening of the film into a tremendously lore-rich world. You can hear in her voice, she is conveying the melancholy for an age lost, a sense of grandeur that has eluded us now, and also just a little bit of maybe the sins of the past as well. She's conveying character status. We know a little bit about the elves. Once we connect with her again in the film and we see, that's the voice we heard before. We understand their status. We understand their cultural background. First time we see an elf in the film, we will be able to marry it to what we've seen there. So there's a lot happening in a very short period of time. So voice acting it's a very information dense medium. We're going to come back to that idea a little bit later on as well. So if we start with game design from the idea of what do we want players to feel? Well, voice acting, it's too powerful a tool. It's too rich and too dense a thing to be able to use, especially to trigger emotion, to leave on the table. Like music, it goes straight for the heart. Now, on the topic of being information dense.
Helen Marshall is head of operations. She's tough, ex-CIA. She took her Rangers and went to the research sector to secure the HRA production. She hasn't come back.
Someone who could help us.
Okay, so Control is a real study in the use of micro expressions in their cutscenes. Their facial animations are sublime because they're not just giving you a static expression, but you can see the thoughts occurring from moment to moment. And that's one of the real differences. We've got a Kristen joining us. Welcome, Kristen. There we go. And you can get a lot of information conveyed in writing, but one of the real benefits of voice acting is voice acting will push that over to the audience. Oftentimes, Sunless Skies is a great example of a game that has just incredible writing, but it would be cost prohibitive to have that game fully voiced, which is a shame because, the tone of the writing in that game is incredible. And it rewards investigation, but voice acting can often push that over to your audience. It can do that work on their behalf, make things a little bit easier. So from word to word and sentence to sentence, an actor, when they are performing text, is going to be making choices about text interpretation. There are so many different ways to move through an individual sentence. The regular workouts that I run at Tavern of Voices, it's one of the things that I love about what we do there, because we get to work in the micro where we'll often work for half an hour with just 3 sentences and find nuggets of gold in things to consider. Sorts of things that you're considering and the sorts of things that voice acting can convey. If we go back to Galadriel for a moment, the character's emotional state, the character's physical state, what's happening with them physically. Are they wounded? Are they tired? In a property like Walking Dead, then your sense of just either existential or physical exhaustion is such a big part of conveying the character's regular state. You know, it's kind of the default status. If someone comes in and they're super chipper and super full of energy, like Negan, you're like, what's going on with this character? It tells us something different about their status. Character's context, we can convey that. Where are they in the actual world? So physically, are they in a big cave? Are they hiding from someone? So are they behind a set of bushes? We can convey that with voiceover. We can convey that with voice acting. In the case of physical environment, we can do that with post-processing. We can add reverb over voice acting. We can do that with assets like footsteps as well, but voice acting gives us another opportunity to convey where they are in that actual world. And if we want to save a little bit of time, or if we want to reduce the amount of game that we need to develop, we can lean on voice acting to convey some of that information. So if characters are concealed from enemies that are nearby, whispering tells us they're hiding from something. We don't necessarily need to see it on screen. We'll come back to that again as well as another point. A big thing that voice acting will tell us is our status relationship between the character and the subject that they're talking about in a given line. Whether that subject is a topic, a piece of information. So say, for example, in The Last of Us, if you've got a character talking about another faction, or that subject could be another character. So they're talking about another character that they know. So we get status from that as well. So that we can convey a lot of information in a performance in a short period of time. It can give us some real nuance. All right, I've lost my chat window. So please let me know if there is anything happening in chat. Hang on, I'll see if I can bring that back up. There we go. Yay! Okay, so resources in game development, even more so in a jam, are limited. So why should we look at using VO? Because voice acting can solve problems for us and not just create them. If you want to guide characters towards discovery, if there's a part of a level that they're not moving towards, or a hidden secret that you want to just push them towards, then you can use character barks to aid in discovery. Uncharted 4 from memory and both Last of Us used that to great effect with just little character barks of, to invite curiosity. The character becomes curious about something, or we find out, there's maybe something nearby that I should be looking at. If you want to convey the physical settings, we've talked about the whole idea of a big cave with reverb, also with level of projection. We can use voice acting to give us an idea of proximity. Are we yelling across the room to someone as well? Setting and period. If you really want to convey setting and period, then accents and dialects and mannerisms can get really driven home by your voice acting performances as well. Yeah, exactly. Barks that aren't just throwing a grenade. I mean, they're useful from a utility perspective, and we'll come back to the idea of voice acting as UX. But yeah, exactly. It's not just the combat utility, but things that are telling us something about the actual world as well. Also, if you want to convey world lore, everyone loves being told a story. And audio logs have become almost a cliche or something that we like to joke about. But if you can find a way diegetically to bed them down in the game in a way that makes sense, they let us experience the story without having to break out of the core game loop as a player. The first game that I played that let me actually play and I think it's Doom Eternal that does this compared to Doom 3, but lets you play an audio log and be told a story while you're moving around the world is so cool, because you don't have to break out of the core gameplay experience in order to go through and pick up this additional information as well. If you've got writing problems with the narrative of your game that you don't have time to solve, it's not an elegant solution, but if it worked for Blade Runner, it can work for you. Paper over it with monologues. Add some distanced perspective. Maybe it's a retrospective, and that lets you layer on some perspective over time for a character. A slightly different approach to something like, say, for example, what Bastion does with narrating what's happening right then in that moment. Narrating it in a past tense gives us a real sense of history there. If you need to lift your combat, efforts and exertions can make it feel that much more visceral. It can add, and we're going to come back to this point as well, but it can add emotional content. If you've got a problem with game feel, if your platforming in your game feels heavy and you can't quite fix it, you're not quite sure, like you've been working on this for weeks, and it still feels a little bit dense and a little bit heavy, you can lean into the aesthetic with voice acting. Add efforts and exertions that convey that sense of mass and heaviness. Go full Gears of War with it and just give that feeling of mass. And then it doesn't fix the core problem, but you've at least got a consistent aesthetic where a player might read that combat design then, or that platforming, as intentional, rather than it being something that doesn't quite work for them. Let's see, where are we going? We talked about platforming. Yeah, so voice acting, I mentioned this in the last slide, but it can help imply the world without having to build it. I still remember there was an amazing slide at Free Play 2011 where Stefan Schutz was talking about if you want to have a helicopter in your game, and this was from a sound design perspective, you can add the sound of that helicopter off screen. You can add all of the ambience around that. So the sound of basically the rotors whirring, the push of wind, and all you've got to do is just animate, say, for example, like your grass blowing. You don't need to go through the process of building a full 3D helicopter and having it on screen and taking up polygons, but you get everything that you need out of that. Voice acting can be used in a similar way. It can imply part of your world without being shown part of the world. And sometimes that can be more powerful than having something on screen, especially if you're talking about genres like, for example, cosmic horror. Having something implied or referred to as or is in some ways more pleasant than it is actually having it on screen. Oh, you have this in Receiver 2 as well. Oh, awesome, awesome. I'd love to hear more about that later on. All right, so voice acting can be UX as well. It can convey character state. If you don't want to have a health bar, then you can have levels of efforts or exertions or breathing to give an indication of the character's fatigue. If they're injured, then you might have the occasional grunt or groan, so you know that your character's not doing all that well. If they're in stealth mode, you whisper your dialogue instead of it actually being said out loud, like the stage whispers that you get in Uncharted 4 between the Drake brothers when they're dealing with one of the heist situations, when they're dealing with a point where they're trying to take down a set of guards. That was so much fun because you had those two characters going from just the back and forth to dropping down to stage whispers between each other. All right, so let's watch something that's going to lead us into our next point.
Kick me. Kick me. What was that? An exhibition? We need emotional content. Try again. I said emotional content, not anger. Now try again. With me.
There's so much that is buried in the last line there. Try again with me. Oh, it's so good. So good voice acting, good performance is about emotional content, and it's in relationship with something else. And that idea of when he was asking his student, don't come at me with anger, but come at me invested in this moment. I want you to be fully part of what you're doing. That's what makes a great performance. And we're going to come back to acting a little bit later on, but it's a big part of what informs a great performance. Anger or big showy performance, we don't believe it. It's just demonstrative. But something that's invested, that has a relationship with something, that's what draws us in. So great voice acting, it's emotional content in context, but it's not just about demonstrating there. Anger is an emotion. You can't play emotions when you're performing. What you can play, and we'll come back to this, what you can play is intense, or you can play verbs. And we're going to talk about that distinction. Now, so all of this starts with great writing, and that means that we're going to consider a few things on the next slide there. But yeah, voice acting is always working in conjunction with other disciplines in order to actually really lift a game. Guido, I'm so jealous of you having experienced Half-Life Alyx. That everything I hear about that is fantastic, and it's great to hear that the voice guidance is well implemented there. And it's so true that in VR, your user experience really needs to consider a whole different form factor, because you don't necessarily want to have a fixed point of reference for the player in front of them all of the time. Doesn't that, from memory, that uses diegetic, similar to Prey, that uses like in-game UX, doesn't it? Like to give you indicators on your ammo and everything else. That's all basically in-world artifacts, if I remember correctly. And your point, Ben, about having a health bar as well for accessibility reasons is absolutely a great point. Yeah, I won't necessarily encompass all, like there are absolutely counterpoints to a lot of what I'll raise here, but a lot of what I'm doing here is just advocating for voiceover. So there are some problems it can solve, but there are absolutely secondary concerns there. Very good point. Okay, so framing character action. Verbalize, and I'll come back to a few books at the end of all of this. Verbalize is one that is fantastic in terms of trying to actually really spark your writing. If you're putting together, it works for games, and it works for screen, it works for theater. And this is something that I come back to again and again when I'm directing folks. Whenever a character opens their mouth, there is a reason for that. They are saying something to affect a change. So 2 questions. What is the character trying to get the other person to do? What is the character trying to make the other person do? 2 very subtle differences there in terms of achieving an outcome. But that's how Verbalize frames the idea of this is what all of your dialogue should be doing. And it's something to consider from a writing perspective. Also, they have a really great tool of condensing your characters down to an encompassing verb. That's a little more complex to go into than we probably have time for here. But the idea of trying to find, for example, Dracula drains. All of his actions across the novel are framed with that verb. And that's the touch point. That's the reference for what should this character be doing at a given point in time. It doesn't mean that every time Dracula says something, he is trying to drain someone else, but you try and frame it with a variation or a color of that idea. Gotcha. Fair bit. A lot of environmental cues and fun dialogue between the player character and the guide, Russell. Oh, that's right. It is Rhys Darby. Yeah. Oh, God. Rhys is amazing. I love him so much. What was it? I'm going to blank on the film. But Jumanji, the recent Jumanji films, I loved him in that. Art of Dramatic Writing as well is another great book on purposeful action. And this is something you can come back to because when you're developing a game, when you're writing anything, you want to do as little as possible fundamentally. When you're coming back to editing, or you're trying to pare things down to the core essentials, because it's like architecture. It's done when nothing can be removed. So Art of Dramatic Writing is a book that has a really great principle, which is this idea that there should be no action happening on stage without intent. And it's a really great from a theater perspective, because it talks about the idea that if you get directed by someone, like if your director says, go from here to here, then if you don't agree with that, then you can raise an objection, but it's your job then as an actor to find a reason why you are walking from here to there, because it has to make sense in the context of the character. You can't just trundle across the stage for no reason, because we see that. We see, this character is just going to another mark, and audiences pick that up. But if you have an intent, then we understand that as something that actually makes sense in the world. So from a writing perspective, if you have dialogue, give each line an intent. Find a verb for that line that the character is trying to perform, distinct from what the actual verb for that character may be. And there's a really great reference we'll come to towards the end, which is a book called Actions, which is just a thesaurus of actions, and it's delicious. And I'll talk about why later on. Okay, something to consider. You can season your dialogue to taste with things like your non-verbal, so grunts, groans, sighs. You can add pauses at a point in time, so between thoughts for a character. These are things that can really spice up your actual delivery. You might put these in the writing, or you might just find the moments for these in the actual directing and performance. But they can really lift your performance and make it feel real. A general rule of thumb for most of these is, if I'm trying to talk to you about something and then I exhale, I sigh, or I pause, there is always a reason why that pause exists. And so a really good rule of thumb is to have, what is the thing that character is not saying in that moment? Because that's why we do those things. We might sigh in exhalation because that's us doing something instead of just going, oh, for fuck's sake. That's what we're implying a lot of the time when we do something like that. Or if we pause, it might be because we're trying to articulate the right words. Understand what the reason why you have a pause. If there's an ellipsis, it needs to be informed. Because it's very different. If I pause because I'm trying to think of my next few words, that's very different to me pausing because I'm approaching an uncomfortable topic, or it's something that I don't want to go into. Pauses can be so powerful in performance for really making the audience lean in. If I'm about to talk about something that I really don't want to talk about because I'm revealing a secret that reflects poorly on me, that sense of hesitation, that trepidation of me kind of circling the door of all of that, it's so good as an audience. It's so good from an audience perspective. You hear that and you go, oh, oh, this person's in a place of discomfort. I really want to know what's going to happen next. This is going to be juicy, and I really feel for them at the same time. These are our inroads to getting really powerful cocktails of emotions in a performance. Now, stealing from a good friend, the amazing Scott Burns, eating or drinking as part of performance as well can really add a sense of life. If you watch Robert Downey Jr. in Avengers, he is eating half of the time when he's on screen. I can't speak to it with veracity, but I do remember someone talking about the fact that he got in trouble for sneaking food on set for so many of his scenes. Why? Because eating gives context. It gives him something to do. Instead of just standing there and delivering his lines, eating gives you something that you can actually perform. It's a lot easier to deliver a monologue if you're eating or if you're driving a car or something else, because it gives you context. So all of these are devices that can be used as, yeah, it is. He's always eating. And it's genius because it gives him context. It makes him feel real. Like, especially as the character he is, he's meant to be like this hyper genius. You believe that he's trying to keep his blood sugar up constantly and that he's fidgety. And so he eats sunflower seeds and probably leaves them everywhere too. So all of these things are seasoning, but they should be used then, just like we use seasoning for cooking. I'm going to hit the mic again because obviously I'm a professional. Use them with restraint. They delight and they can make our moments pop when we use them carefully. But if we use them too much, then they can overcrowd a performance. And as you're playing through a game, if we hear these things again and again and again, we can start to recognize them as tricks rather than them feeling like part of the actual character. Sometimes the best thing to do is just to deliver a line throwaway, especially if it's completely in contrast to the actual nature of the line. If you're saying something super heavy, sometimes the best thing to do is just to throw it away and then let it sit, give a moment for it to breathe. All right, so here is another great example of a moment, and this is a way of using some of these tools, and we're coming from another high bar again. We're comparing against another really high bar here.
You gotta see this.
What is it? What the hell is it?
Are you kidding me? Come on, hurry up. You see this? Shh, don't scare it.
I won't.
What are you doing?
It's all right. Come here. Hey, fella. Hurry up, come on. Go on.
Now, let's not move on from there yet. Now, I know Naughty Dog are a whole separate conversation in terms of their work practices, but the things that make that scene great from a voice acting perspective are things that can be achieved with just structuring. We can look at the structure of that and something we can do. It's the mild efforts and exertions for Joel's breathing. I heard 2 different layers there for a slight jog and walking, almost imperceptible when he's walking, but it's there for a little bit. The different levels of emotion there. We got wonder, we got disbelief, mild impatience, that paternal care and drawing people in, just a whole bevy of emotions in about, what was it, like 4 different lines, maybe 6 lines, like 3 per character. So it was a great way of drawing out the reveal of one particular moment by having this back and forth in voice acting between these 2 characters, and then using efforts and exertions to add just a little bit of life to the scene as well. We didn't see it as much here, but there's also examples in this game of just light efforts and exertions for when a character, I'm just checking to see if my hand's actually on camera, but interacting with the environment, as well, just having a mild effort or an exertion for that. Really subtle in those cases, so it doesn't sound super weird. But you know, that just little things like that can make the character feel like they're bedded more closely in the environment as well. And I'm so sorry if you haven't played either of those, Guido, for spoiling that like one particular moment there. But yeah, I mean, it's a great example of how we can use voice acting to great effect. Now, let's talk about directing. It's not this. What it is this. So that's you. And that's you. Once we actually start talking about performance, because if you're having voice acting as part of your game for the jam, or if you're curious about using voice acting going forward in your games, direction needs to happen at some point in time. When you are directing a performer, the most valuable thing that you are doing is keeping your performer afloat and supported. You want to create a space that is playful, that it's supportive, so that people can feel free to actually try things, just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. If the people that you're directing, and this can happen with professionals and it can happen with amateurs, if your talent start to feel like they're losing it, like they're not giving you what you want and you're having to ask for take after take after take, the thing that you want to avoid, and it can happen to the best of us, but you start getting rigid because you start operating from a place of fear. I'm not doing it. I can't give them what they want. I'm no good. I suck at this. Because imposter syndrome, everyone gets it, but boy, howdy, do performers get it more than everyone else, I think. We get it in double helpings. And one of the ways that you can stop that from happening is just positive support during a session. You want to avoid people getting into that downward spiral, because once it starts, it's really hard to snap people out of it. As a side note, while I think of it, one of the ways that you can actually do that, and I've heard this from several directors, is you can just stop and chat with your performer. Let's talk about what they had for lunch, or ask them about something. Just get them to jump up and down in the booth. Just muck around with them. Tell a joke. You can break that when it starts to happen by stopping the work and just talking about something else instead. So when you're actually directing, you don't have to bullshit your performers. But what you do want to do is you want to try and find a way to frame any feedback that you have for them in a positive light. And it can be really difficult to do this. It's a learned skill. But one tip you can take away from this is when you're directing folks, think of things in terms of adding something in rather than taking things out. So if a line delivery feels a little bit stiff, then you can say, hey, add a bit of ease into that, rather than saying, okay, well, let's do it again, but less stiff. Let's take some of that stiffness out. Psychologically, it seems really silly, but it's harder to think of taking things out or not doing something than it is to think of doing something deliberately instead. You know, it's like saying, don't think about the white elephant. The minute you say it, like, people are going to do it. You tell someone, just try not to be stiff. Well, they're going to be stiff. But if you're adding ease, it gives them something to shoot for. Here's my goal. Here's my target. There was something else I was going to say there as well. Another side tip as well that just occurs to me now, completely separate to the actual notes here, but a really good tip I heard from a director once that was shared with me by Nick Healy is a director. Just give me a quick second to frame this. A director was having a problem with a talent at one point in time where they were getting locked into a pattern for delivering a line. They were getting the same thing over and over again. And so the director said to the performer, okay, do that again, but I want it more purple this time. What does that mean? Who knows what like a purple delivery is, but the thing that it did is it made the performer think about that, and they're like, okay, purple, what would be a purple delivery? What does that mean to me? It forced them to try and find another path. Like, the director didn't have an idea of what purple did, or if they did, maybe they're a silly person, but it gave them a way of just snapping them out of that pattern. All right. When you're directing, come into a session with an idea of what you want for your individual lines. Have a rough map of where you want to be, but be willing at the same time to be surprised. You want to have that. You want to have both of those in tension. I have been directed by people where it's fairly clear that they don't know what they want, and that is frustrating for a performer. It's secondary to what we're talking about here as part of this game jam, because it's all about looking at what are the things that I don't do normally that I can add to my disciplines as part of all of this. But given that we are talking about these as broader disciplines, it's something to take away from that as well. have some idea of what you want, but be flexible enough to be surprised, because you've got someone performing for you so that they can delight you. And they have a different creative idea. You know, this is why we work in teams, especially in jams. It's because everyone brings a creative vision, and it's the combination of all of those things together that creates a better whole. Directing as well, it's active listening. It's tremendously draining from an energy perspective, but that's what it's all about. It's active listening. Okay, so some considerations for directing, some things to think about. We're making good time here, which is good, which means we'll be able to get onto QA in a sec. Now, one thing to consider for a moment here, and this might trip you up for a moment, but when we talk, and obviously what's happening here is different to all of this, because this is a formal workshop and I'm thinking on the fly of how to frame quite abstract, in some cases, thoughts. This isn't a natural conversation. But when you have a natural conversation with someone, especially if you're ranting, you never run out of breath. Your body, your mind knows the thought that you are going to say. And it is so good at what it does that it gives you the amount of gas that you need to say that thing. Like, we never get to a point when we're talking with someone else, like when you're in a bar where we're like, oops, I didn't quite breathe enough to say that particular line, because we understand the thought of what is coming out of us. Like, we understand what it is that we're going to say just instinctively. Why am I mentioning that? Because when you are performing, so moving over, this is both a directing and a performing perspective here. If we don't understand the thought of the line that we are delivering, then one of the real symptoms of that can be that we run out of breath because we don't understand the thought. The breath informs the character and informs the performance. Now, how can you use that from a practical perspective? Feeling like Kevin is underestimating how fast your thoughts go compared to your breaths. Yeah, I guess it varies depending on the person. Sometimes we can get overexcited. Like, there are exceptions to these rules, but I mean, that still is that's a fairly consistent pattern. Like, you get overexcited and you have so many things you want to say, you might feel like you're rushed and you might be drawing breath constantly. But I'd be super surprised if there was a point where halfway through a sentence you suddenly went, and now I can't actually finish that particular sentence there. But you know, who knows? It may happen. So yeah, our bodies have this amazing ability. So if you're delivering a line and you run out of breath, it's a good warning sign that you don't quite understand what it is that you're trying to say with a piece of text. And that kind of ties into the next concern here as well, which is one of the first instincts that you will have to combat if you are delivering voice acting. One of the things to watch out for if you are directing voice acting is our instinct. And I've dealt with this, and it's definitely one of the things that happens in our regular workouts. The instinct is to run to the end of the line, because then your chances for being wrong stop. If I'm not saying anything at this point in time, I can't be wrong. I can't be making a silly choice. I'm no longer vulnerable. It's a natural instinct. Instead, what you want to do is you want to find the rhythm of a line. You want to look at every individual piece of text. I have been so surprised by how many times I will have written off an audition piece thinking, yeah, it's kind of cliched. But with real interrogation, you can find these gems of moments that are just, exquisite. In fact, let's see if I can find one very quickly. I just want to bring it up as an example. Let's go off book. Just to see, let's see if Dropbox is going to behave. It may not. It just occurred to me now. We're going to actually, hang on, wait, are we there? No. AGJam scripts. I may be able to find in this folder. If I can't, I'll come back to it later. No, I can't find it here. All right. I've got a file in a folder somewhere. Spoilers. I've got a file in a folder somewhere that we'll come back to. And it was something that happened during like a weekly thing I do with some folks. And the line was fairly cliched, like a fairly cliched military bark. or military text, but with direction, we realized that there were so many stages that one line could go through, so many thoughts that it could encompass. And it just turned from being this flat thing where I'd run from one end of the line to the other into something that was exquisite, that really painted a scene. So if you think about a line, you can really find that chance to paint a whole scene with it. All right. So give each individual line room when you're performing. Don't rush it. And it's going to be your talent's first impulse. If that's you or someone you're directing, the first impulse is going to be just get it done. If I stop talking, then I can stop, then I remove that vulnerability. It's scary doing this stuff. Everyone hates hearing the sound of their own voice. But if you can get into that place of delight, it makes a huge difference. All right. Let's see what else. I'll just close my Discord as well because apparently Discord is open. Ha ha, professionalism. Where is Discord? That's Discord. Okay, other things to consider. Every line is in relation to something else. You are talking about something or you are talking to someone. So you always have this relationship with either subjects or with characters. Every line as well is in response to something else. Even if it's the first line that's written as part of a scene, you always want to be considering what is the thing that happened just before this moment. If you can frame a line as being in response to something else, it makes a huge difference in terms of its feel. Instead of it feeling like it's having to kind of come onto stage as the first thing that's happening, it makes it feel like it's part of a tapestry. So every line is always in response to something else. What happened in the moment just before this? Consider your surroundings as well. So if you're in a firefight, you're going to be performing that voiceover differently to if you're in the middle of a church. Now I say that and it might seem really silly, but and I'm not going to mention what it was, but I remember listening to a demo or a trailer for an Alexa game, and it had fairly high production value and a prestigious cast. But one of the things that turned me off straight away is they had a character who was joining another character in the middle of a firefight. And the first line that the character uttered was just conversational. And there's the suspension of disbelief gone. I don't believe it now because that character isn't in that moment in time. I don't hear them huddling from the bullets. I don't feel them feeling the stakes of that scene. Da, 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 da. All right, so the great news is you're playing with power because you as the game developer know all of the things that traditionally us voice actors need to go and interrogate or make up answers for as part of an actual performance, the things that we will consider when we're coloring voice acting performance. So you know the character's physical state, you know their emotional state, you know their immediate surroundings. You understand who they're talking to, what their relationship is with that character. If it's not as fleshed out as it could be, or if there are some questions there, great. This is flushed out something that you can build up as part of the narrative design of your game. You understand what the character's talking about, what the character's relationship is to that subject. What are the stakes? Now, and if you want electric scenes, you can amplify those stakes as well. Not every scene needs to be big, but sometimes you may need to actually just amplify a choice. Who is this character to my character? So are they a friend? Are they my best friend? Are they a potential lover? You know, all of these things. You can amplify those choices in terms of who someone is talking to or what is happening to create a more electric scene as well. Now, going back to writing for a moment here, Verbalize, the book will come, and I've got, at the end of everything, we've got a slide that has those 3 books, but Verbalize has a great principle for having characters talking to each other. Find 2 characters that have conflicting verbs, or create characters that have conflicting verbs in order to create friction, to create interesting scenes. So for example, one character might have a fundamental verb of confound. Another character might be clarify. Those 2 characters are going to butt heads because they want different things. They're wired in different ways. You know, fundamentally, that's you know, you can make a case that that's Sherlock Holmes and Watson. So yeah, you know all of this already because you are the game developer. So you know all of the things that need to go into the actual voice acting performance. All right, let's talk about recording briefly. I think a lot of you here have an audio background already, so this might be talking to people who know more than me about all of this. But if you're recording video, A blanket fort's going to get you a long way. If you don't have room treatment, then you can just use a phone, pop a blanket over yourself. That'll go a long way in getting rid of room reflection. You can, now, an iPhone, that is fine for recording dialogue. If you want something that is a little bit more sophisticated, if you don't have a microphone around that you want to use, I recommend the Rode SmartLav. I've been using that for the last 5 months in order to do straight to video recording, but it's a cheap mic that'll work directly with an iPhone. It just needs a connector. I think it'll work with an Android phone as well. I'm not 100% sure, but it costs, from memory, it costs like under $100 to pick up. And it has really good quality too. And it's not going to pick up much of the room around you. Like Sherlock and Watson as an example, because they're opposites in that sense. Yeah, exactly. They're opposed characters, but they're not enemies. But they're characters where they have fundamentally different ways of looking at the world that cause each other frustration. You know, The Odd Couple as well. You know, another great example. They're friends, but they have different philosophies. And so that teases out really interesting conversations. Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's why they're great characters to have together. Now, getting back to recording, post-processing, if you have access to iZotope RX7, it is awesome. And you can get free trials of most iZotope stuff as well. So that might see you through a part of the game jam if you register for a free trial at the right point when you're getting to doing voice acting. iZotope RX7 has mouth declick. I've used RX5 in the past, and its declick is okay, but mouth declick is levels better. Why do we care about declick? Because that is going to get rid of incidental mouth noises that are being made that you don't want to have as part of the performance. So if I have a lot of saliva in my mouth, you might be hearing occasionally these little click noises that come in as part of an actual performance. I think from memory, I'm thinking about this on the fly, but I think you'll especially hear them around sibilants or ejectives, so sounds like T and that sort of stuff, but you'll see them as little spikes on the tail end or the start of a word, and you don't want them there, or sometimes they'll be in the middle of a word. Mouth declick is a great way of just magically removing them. If you don't have access to RX7, then the plugins that you get with DAW software like Reaper will get you a long way as well. I mean, for the basics, a noise gate used sparingly. So a noise gate is something that's going to stop, for those of you who are unaware of this, and again, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm talking to folks who probably know a lot more about audio than me to begin with, but a noise gate is just going to stop any noise below a certain dB threshold. And you can set parameters around that as well. All new to you. Fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that this is useful information. RX Elements is on special. Yes, that's true. Yeah, I don't think it includes mouth declick, but I have a few voiceover colleagues who have bought RX Elements on special because eventually iZotope will offer an upgrade at a reduced price from Elements through to the regular version. Not so much of a help for the jam because you all are about to start that this Friday, but it is definitely something to consider if you do a lot of post-processing of voiceover. So yeah, a noise gate is just going to stop noise below a certain threshold. And then once noise gets above a certain threshold, it will then fire and let everything through. And there's more to it than that, but that's the basics. And so that means it can get rid of a lot of those little mouth noises as well. Noise suppression as well. Like you can find plugins that'll get rid of stuff like fans. You give it a little bit of a learning period of audio. So just give it some room tone. If you've got background noise you can't get rid of, then it'll scrub that out of your audio as well. And it'll do a pretty good job. All right. So that is the end. That is everything I have from a formal perspective. These three things here, these three books, if you do want somewhere to go for more advice on narrative design or writing or ways to actually look at direction, I highly recommend these three books. So Actions, The Actor's Thesaurus, The Art of Dramatic Writing, and Verbalized by Damon Suede. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, Audacity does do an okay denoise. I never got it working properly myself. I always found that I had artifacts, but I know a lot of people swear by it.
Yeah, my partner uses it a lot. Oh, Ben, answer them anyways. Maybe he could expand. I also had a heap of questions that are now like falling out of my head.
if they're falling out, because they're answered, fantastic. Otherwise, all right, here we go.
Yeah.
Ways to maintain or remember relations and responses. Hang on, here we go. I read a back and forth lines between an actor and director, discussion of... Okay. Hang on, let me break through this. I'm going to pick and choose these one by one. So first of all, playing environmentals through their headphones as they act. Yes. So much yes.
Cool.
Any director who does that, it's delicious. If you are trying to really convey, especially like a sci-fi battlefield, it just puts you straight there. It's a really good tool. For professional recording, you need to start worrying about, are their headphones going to leak onto the mic when they're actually performing? But otherwise, yes, it is such a great tool for putting someone into a situation. You can even do that with mood and tone as well. There's a really
like
great
some music or something.
Yeah, exactly. Music can do it if there's something that people find gets them into a certain mood. Music can be tricky if there's vocals, like that might start distracting you or tying up the linguistic part of your brain. There's a really great podcast, a horror podcast called the Magnus Archives, where they have a very simple piece of sound design that comes in whenever supernatural elements start. So even just little bits of sound design like that, if you're trying to create like a horror feel, can help to get people into that frame of mind. So let's see, back and forth lines between the actor and director, they absolutely can help. If you have a scene that's tight, sort of like firing back and forth between characters, yes, ideally you want to have that performed by both of the people who are going to be acting out those characters. Failing that, yes, having the director there is going to give you exactly what you want, which is that sense of that character being in response, in relationship to something else. It's always best to be able to have, the line that they're responding to, so that those two things will glue together. But otherwise, like a good fallback there is to have the director actually performing that line as well. But yeah, if there's a difference between what the director does in the session and what your other actor has done as part of the line, so if we're going from line A to B, if I'm responding to line A and the director does line A differently to the person that you've recorded, then it's not going to sound right in game. Less of a concern for a game jam, but absolutely something to consider as part of recording over time. Hopefully that helps answer that question. Does that make sense, by the way? Let me know if it doesn't. Ways to maintain and remember relationships and responses. Putting context, like putting the actual context for the character at the start of a scene, is a really good thing that I've seen done in some scripts. So it will say these characters are in this location, this is happening here. And if you're changing, like, especially if you've got a very dynamic game where, say, for example, you might be up close in proximity and then a character moves away or is off screen, however that actually happens, like whatever the change is, yeah, you want to note that as part of the actual script. Discussing the context with the actor before the scene can be a really good thing as well. One thing I didn't mention when we were talking about directing too is another good rule of thumb, and this is a difficult muscle to build, but you want to be as concise as possible. And I know that's ironic coming from me as someone who just will not shut up, but you want to make sure you're using the fewest number of words possible, because it can be this real temptation to go over and over on a point. But if you get to a point where your actor gets it, you want to shut up and let them do it at that point. Otherwise, what's going to happen is they're going to go hot. And then as they're waiting politely for you to finish talking, they're going to go cold again. But you want to have a relationship with your performers where they can go, yep, I've got it, Kevin, shut up. And then just go for it, because you want that magic. Got it. Directed a few non-professional voice actors and you'd love to be able to give them pointers. Can I recommend any resources for getting better at voice acting? Yes, I can. Bear with me. That's a really good question. I didn't have time. I don't know. Is that an excuse? Is that a paltry excuse? I'm just going to bring up a thing here. I'm going to find Pat Fraley's website. I feel like it's a little bit Schindler's List. I could have done more. Pat Fraley has a bunch of amazing free lessons on his website. I would recommend that as a good starting point. Where is it? Home study. Free. There we go. Pat's really good at doing that that freelancer thing of here is a taster. Oh no, Jessica's joining us now. I'm so sorry, Jessica. Oh, we'll have a recording. We'll have a recording for you. Unless you're coming in to tell us we need to leave soon. Yeah, Pat is really good about giving you like a free taster and value to then go and actually purchase his services. So I think that answers the questions that you had, Ben. Discussion of context before each scene. Yeah, you can do it before each line, but hopefully your script tells you enough that you don't need to go per line, because once a character's in the groove, or once an actor's in the groove for a character, you don't want to like pull them out of it any more than you need to. You know, at that point, you could go, any questions? Or just say, look, we're going to go from line to line. If you've got any questions, let me know. Free side tip. Google Sheets are absolutely amazing. I was a good boy then. I didn't use the other word that was going to come to mind. They are absolutely amazing for guiding a performance, because you can, as a director, and I've done this a few times in sessions as a performer, if you sit on the cell that you want the person to be performing, and then if you're happy with the take, you just go down to the next cell. No words. It's a really quick way of working, and I've loved it every time I've done it from either side of the fence. You just click down and then you see, okay, great, we got it. I can move on now. The shorter the number of words that aren't about the actual performance, the quicker you get through stuff. What if you're doing your own voicing? Can you direct yourself, or is that a terrible idea? If you're doing your own performance, try and separate the hats of directing and performing. So one way that you can do that is you can perform. So put down basically on your phone or whatever, like put down a version of your lines, or do it basically with whatever you're doing to record your final performance. You can do that. Sorry, just bear with me for, hang on, I just realized, have we lost? Oh, gotcha, there we go. I was on the wrong screen there. Yeah, so you can record a first pass and then listen to that and think, okay, where does this not land? What am I missing? And then go back and record again. But don't do it during the actual session, because if you're criticizing yourself, you're gonna get yourself into that frame of mind where you're gonna lock up and you're gonna go, oh, this isn't any good. This all sucks. This is terrible. So yeah, yes, you can direct yourself, but just alternate between those two things. Another thing, another resource, I realize we're on 9 o'clock now. Voiceactingmastery.com. Hang on, let's put that in.
I have a question on directing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How do you have any techniques to sort of like get yourself re-hyped? Like, something that I do at jams, and like in-person jams, or when getting a few actors in a room, is like to get that energy, to get people to express like without holding back, especially things like weird sounds or Simlish or that sort of thing. And when everyone's comfortable, you can just like pass the Zoom mic around and everyone will go blah, 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 or whatever. How do you do that if you're at home, or if like or maybe as a director, how could you do that if you sent something to a voice actor to do at home and then come back? Or how do you hype yourself?
Yeah, it's tough because there are things you can do, like improv games where you're in a group where you can all be silly together, like you were saying, that get that energy up. When you're at home by yourself, music can be a good thing. If you've got touchstones like art or something that are kind of the core of what excites you about the thing that you're doing, then having that around can keep you hyped. Exercise, like just doing a few minutes of like star jumps or jump rope or something like that, or running around the room. Getting the heart rate up can help because that triggers that flow of endorphins to get you into that state too. Yeah. It can be tough. It's a matter of what works for the individual person. But yeah, I like music and exercise, I think are two good ways of trying to trigger, just basically trigger that chemistry. If that helps at all. Chocolate as well.
Is chocolate good for your voice?
Uh, if you get dark chocolate, it's dairy free. So
Oh yeah, okay,
yeah, so
cool.
you're not going to have to worry about phlegm. And then you still get all of the good caffeine. A caffeine, like some people say caffeine's bad for you. It really depends because I've worked with Lani Manella. Like I've worked with people locally and they're like, well, here's my regimen and here's what I eat and here's what I don't eat and here's how I drink in the morning to prepare myself.
Wow.
And I've worked with Lani Manella and Lani's like, I just do whatever. And you listen to the stuff that she can do and you're like, okay, clearly for some people it doesn't matter. Yeah. Let's see. Ben asks, when directing, if they get it right first time, is that enough, or is there a concern there might be something wrong? A good rule of thumb is to get 3 takes, or at least a safety take on something, because the performance might be fine, but there might be a problem with the audio. Now that's less of a concern for game jams and more of a concern for an actual like directed session, where you want to have that safety line just in case there's something that you didn't hear or you didn't catch in the actual audio. Especially at the moment, as we're doing so much like remote recording, like unless you're doing that over Source Connect or something where you've just got these super fat connections where nothing's gonna slip by. Yeah, you want that safety take just in case. And by three is a good rule of thumb because it gives people a chance to play as well. You're like, just give me 3. Just give me 3 different versions of this. Sit or stand when recording. Look, everyone's going to have a different answer on that. I say stand. Stand and use your body. Personally, I like to stand because I can be more expressive, especially if you're doing efforts and exertions as well. Like the more you can get your body into that, the better. That's why I have a bunch of ruined takes from hitting the wall of my booth. I'm actually just about to start experimenting with Mark Estale's anglerfish recording method that Naughty Dog use. I've picked up a DPA mic and a little motion capture headset, a headband rather, and I'm so excited to dig into that because the idea of being able to use my body without having to worry about being on axis on mic,
Yeah.
fuck yes, that's super exciting. But yeah,
You'll have to link that because we for Wayward Strand got a lot of theatre actors because they're used to speaking very big, which is something that we've needed for that sort of 2D animated thing. They move around a lot, which is like great, but also not great.
Yeah, well, once I've had a chance to play with it and get to a result that I'm happy with, yeah, I'll put a video together. I don't know that I don't have a primary source for it anymore because I just remember it's something that I've heard about kind of by reference a few times. But if you go and search for Naughty Dog, like any of the videos of Naughty Dog doing their performance capture, you'll see the motion capture suits and the DPA mics coming down in the little anglerfish pattern. So it's just called anglerfish because like it dangles over their head like an anglerfish. Yeah.
That's so cool.
But yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. You don't want to step on a theatre actor's instincts to use their body. So how can you deal with that? You just put a microphone on the top of their head so it doesn't matter how they move. Because that stuff informs the performance. Yeah. Alrighty, we're running over time, but hopefully, does anyone have any other questions? Because if there's anything we haven't answered here, I can still hang around for a few more minutes if I'm not overstaying my welcome.
You're fine. I just wanted to add that standing is often better than sitting because people don't realize how much noise their chair makes. Just as the one who then edits the video.
That is true too. Yeah, and I guess you've got to be conscious of that with anything. You don't want to be in a situation where your floorboards squeak if you rock from like side to side on them. But yeah, chairs are absolutely going to be likely to be noisier than standing.
Yeah, Kevin has copped a few of my questions of like, a voice actor's meant to do this? Like, Is this something that I have to edit out, or can I tell them to not do that anymore? um, yeah.
If I have a last one, if I have a best mics, condenser or shotgun. Look, that's moving outside of my area of expertise, and I'm not trying to handball that, but I would say it depends as well. It depends on the vocal characteristics of the performer and the kind of performance that you're trying to get out of it as well. So I know shotgun mics are used a lot for imaging, and for like television stuff, because you have this sense of like really close presence. But that might not be as good for, say, for example, a video game if you want to provide like variations on proximity effect. Shotguns are also really great for hiding a variety of sins with what's happening in the room around you too, because it is such a focused signal. But beyond that, I think a lot of the time as well there is, and this isn't me saying that there aren't better and worse pieces of equipment, but I think certainly in the voiceover field there is a temptation for folks to kind of fall into equipment fetish, where obviously the solution is the best microphone. I've just got to change my microphone and then things will be better. When beyond a certain level, the difference that it makes is like, absolutely, if you're spending thousands of bucks on a Neumann, sure, that's going to sound a lot better. But, so yeah, that's a long-winded way of me saying it kind of depends, and I don't really know. So sorry I couldn't be more helpful there. Like there are, I can recommend good basic microphones as entry-level stuff, but yeah, beyond that, it really depends on what you're looking for and who you're recording. Have a look at the frequency response of the microphone as well. So if you're looking at purchasing something to use with a particular talent over time, then yeah, have a look at the frequency response of that microphone, and then either if you're doing the recording, that's probably going to tell you enough, or you can work with an audio engineer to say, hey, here's a basic recording of this person, and here's the mic we're thinking of using. Does this make sense? Do we think this is going to really sweeten, give sweet spots for them? Oh, actually, I can recommend one other thing. I can't give you a link for it, but there are folks who are going to be involved in the jam who probably will know about this, but you can get plugins for recording software, and they're not going to do the same thing as a microphone, but they can kind of give you a demo of what the sound of that microphone is. They basically can emulate an EQ response to sound similar to what that microphone would sound like naturally.
Guido would totally stick with the Rode NT1. Yeah, personally, like as an audio engineer, hadn't heard of shotgun mics being used on vocals. Thought they were very much instrumental mics. Like I've used them to record ensembles a lot, or like Atmoses, because they're so specific to where they're being placed. They're really good for emulating like a stereo ears hearing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, like, yeah, a lav mic here or here, apparently, is also really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that Rode particular is also really good just for anything, basically.
Yeah, I bought an NT1A like 10 years ago, and I'm still using that. At some point I may upgrade to the NT1 because it's supposed to be slightly kinder to male vocal characteristics. But I mean, I've recorded for stuff like Warframe using that, and they're like, yep, this is all good. Yeah. All right, lovely people. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I hope you have a fantastic jam. I hope that you're able to enjoy the experience of making amazing things with amazing people. If you did want to reach out to me, if you have any follow-up questions, if something occurs to you, you're like, that's the thing I was going to ask him, you can reach me at contact@tavernofvoices.com. I will be putting up this recording at either later this evening or probably tomorrow. It'll be going up on the link that we started the actual presentation with. I'll just go back there. I know I'm not screen sharing now, but I'll just find that and post it in here for you all as well. Let's copy that link. So yeah, it'll be going up here. I'll be tweeting it. I'll be popping it into the AGJam Discord as well. And that's a Dropbox folder where the Zoom recording will go, and it'll go up on YouTube a little bit later on as well. But yeah, that's it from me.
Amazing. Thanks so much. That was
Absolute
great.
pleasure. Thank you. Absolute pleasure. Have a wonderful jam, folks.
Bye.